he announces to the world, I've been to the site, I've seen the gold, it's there. The night of May the 3rd. On May the 4th, Bre-X announced there was no gold.
One Great Case, a podcast about law to learn more about people. I'm your host, Areta Lloyd.
Before I let you take it away, I think it would be good to give a brief recap of the facts, because probably a lot of listeners weren't sui juris back then. It's just us old folks. So in 1993, a small and fairly unknown Canadian mining company announced it had discovered what could be the largest gold deposit in history. And it was located in the remotest jungles of Indonesia, which added to the exotic romance of the classic Too Good to Be True tale. Bre-X's value soared from, I think, a couple of million to over $6 billion. And several players were in or tried to get in on the investment, including the legendary Peter Monk, to Suharto, the president of Indonesia at the time, to your client, Bimo Nesbitt-Burns. And regular folks, people like our neighbors, made millions literally overnight. In 1997, I believe it was, the fraud was discovered, followed by a spectacular crash of Bre-X stock price. And adding to the mystery of everything and the disbelief of how this could happen was the apparent suicide of Bre-X's chief geologist, Michael de Guzman. And in the aftermath of this great unraveling, people could not believe the extent of the scam, and they sued. Tell us what was the case against your client and who were the players involved there?
Let me just take you to a basement apartment in Calgary where a guy called Walsh was living with his spouse. And in 1987, he was involved in a small company on the Alberta Stock Exchange, which is characterized as a penny stock, which means it's traded at a very low price and it moves not so much on real results, but on rumor and sometimes on the character of the people who own it. Mr. Walsh was the one who incorporated this company in 1987, and he called it Bre-X Minerals. It struggled along for 6 years until 1993. When Mr. Walsh was talking, as people do in the industry, and most people know everybody in the industry in mining in Canada. There's the small players, the penny stocks, there's the big players, and then there's the huge international players, all of which operate in Canada. So Walsh met a guy called Felderhoff, and he was like an owner of a company with not much prospects would do. He said, look, do you have any suggestions for mining properties? Because that's how mining properties are discovered, by accident or by conversation. And so Mr. Felderhoff replied, I don't know exactly how quickly, but very quickly in terms of the way it all works. She said, I have an idea of a new mining property in Busang, Indonesia. And as night followed day, Mr. Walsh thought this was a good idea, and he hired Mr. Felderhoff as a general manager and made him the vice president of exploration for Bre-X Minerals. Now, Felderhoff remains in the play until he gets charged in 1999 for criminal activity or breaching of the securities statute in a trial that went for 160 days. So this is a huge trial. But all that is taking the beginning and moving it to the end. But I'll now tell you how we got into a situation where Mr. Walsh got an idea. He's got a person to try and carry it out. And as you pointed out, is in a very exotic place in the world. Now, before I get into some of the detail as to how this Bre-X went from a penny mining stock to the darling of an investment across the world in gold, the largest gold mine in the history of mankind, if it were real, The significant part of Canada and Busang, I'll deal with Canada first. Canada is the leading mining finance capital of the world. London comes second and New York comes third. We have a combination of good geologists, good investors who know how to invest in mining, and the money to do it. And huge experience. Our geology faculties in the university, particularly the University of Toronto, have produced any number of superb analysts. But there's always a sense that, yes, I think I've got it this time, but maybe not. There's always this doubt.
So great, isn't it?
So the Busang property is indeed exotic. And as I have not said, but you noted, that there were two kinds of legal actions that arose out of the mess that occurred in 1997 when it was announced that instead of being the largest gold mine in the world, there was no gold at all. And this was one off a cliff shock to everybody who was involved in this property. So Busang, there's a lot of money spent on it, a lot of drilling, and a lot of samples. And when you get samples, in this case, they took them to a person who is called a gold assayer, who fire assays the rock and ends up with real gold. So there's no doubt that you've got gold coming out of this program. The question is, was this the gold from the property or not? Now, why is it that so many sophisticated people from around the world could be fooled by this story? And one of the reasons was that it was at Busang, Indonesia. It's on the equator. And when you go there, as we did as lawyers to try and figure out how to defend this case on behalf of Nesbitt Burns and one of their analysts, it was so steamy hot you couldn't walk. And if you took one step off the boardwalk, you were up to your knees in mud. So you couldn't. And so they had all kinds of drilling equipment that people could go and see. They had all kinds of sheds which contained all of the drilling core. And when you drill for core, you get a round rod, which then gets split into 4 bits. And one part of it is pulverized, put in a bag, and set down for assaying, in this case, to another part of Borneo, as it turns out, bellyback pan. So the whole idea that one could go and investigate as an independent investor to such a site and get a good view of it was very, very difficult. But there's another more hidden piece to it all. You mentioned Mr. de Guzman, who was from the Philippines, and he and a number of his colleagues he was the exploration manager, and they lived on the site with air-conditioned houses or apartments or whatever you call it. And the others, those from Indonesia, they lived in in unprotected hot conditions. And there was therefore a sort of social distinction between the Philippine people and the Indonesians. And then Mr. Felderhoff, who was the vice president of exploration, I don't think he was all the time at the site. But that meant there was a distinction between the Philippines and Indonesians, and there wasn't a lot of connection. They had their own club from the Philippines, and what that played out is certainly they could be secretive about what they were doing. The Indonesians were maybe doing the hard work, and the Filipinos were planning this drilling program and recording the results. That's just a little bit of how there could be such an extraordinary distinction at the site, and why the site itself being so remote and so hot made it impossible for the real professionals to get a grip on this largest gold mine in the history of mankind. So Veldorf starts off in 1993, and he applies to the Indonesian government for what is called a contract of work. And as it turns out, they never get such a contract of work. Now, that means there's doubt about who owns the mine. And that was never resolved before the whole thing blew up. But significantly, hiding underneath, therefore, was a set of concerns about really who owned it. And then that can bring in, as you'll hear about later, people from Indonesia who retain some control because they haven't given over this contract of work permit, which is purely a mining issue for the Indonesian government. But by 1995, 2 years later, they do get a preliminary survey permit. And that was obtained for 2 years. And it ended on July 1997. Now, note that this program started seriously drilling in 1995 and was to go till July 1997 on this preliminary permit, and they never made it because they went from the largest gold mine in the world to no gold at all in less than 2 years. Now, holding back a final survey permit or a contract of work meant the Indonesian government retained a high degree of control. And they were then free to do as they do in making whatever arrangements they wanted as to who, after Bre-X, would take the property. Well, why would Bre-X give up the property? A small mining company like this, regardless of its share price, could never have afforded to bring a gold mine of this size into production. You needed someone at the level of either Barrick Gold Mines, your Peter Monk by name, Placer Dome, which I was connected for a very long time in my old firm Faskins, Tech Corp, Newmont Mining, and the last one, Freeport McMoran, with whom I have had some indirect dealings with in this world of mining around the world.
And they, in fact, are the ones who ended up partnering, right? They're the ones.
So Freeport McMoran was the one who got it.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
The interesting part is that my preliminary in setting up the availability of permits and the shortness of those permits meant that the Indonesian government could call the shot on who. And to give you an idea, I might just go forward to the 1996 period when they started trying to deal with who was going to be the joint venture partner for this case. Barrick spent years and multiple millions of dollars trying to become the joint venture partner. They retained the help and advices of a former president of the United States, a former prime minister of Canada, a businessman from Jordan who was royalty, and from Suharto himself through Suharto's family in Indonesia, Suharto being one of the leaders of Indonesia. So when it came, therefore, to choosing, because they had the right to call who was going to get the permit and therefore who was going to be able to do the second round of joint venturing, they decided Freeport, because Freeport made it more profitable for Indonesia than did any other player. So I'm not suggesting anything improper in all of this, but it was highly competitive and governments are making the choice, and you can use your imagination as to, therefore, whether these were personal connections, whether these were government connections, or how it all worked. But people were interested. If you've got the biggest gold mine in the world, you're going to have the biggest players, and I just named them. And Peter Monk indeed lost out because, as it turns out, the actual deal for Indonesia was 40% better because it was Freeport McMoran. And the Freeport company is itself a very large and very high risk kind of enterprise, I will say. In any event, before I get all the way up to who got chosen to become the joint venture partner through this chaos, I want to just give you a little bit of a hint of how the start from 1995 with a 2-year-long permit from 1996 1995 to 1997, how this all then played itself out. So first of all, the company was listed on the Alberta Stock Exchange, relatively minor player in the overall scheme of Canadian stock exchanges. They started drilling in 1995, and they began to announce that there were positive gold results. Now, this is like a rumor, isn't it? Who knows? But they're making the announcement. And the question, you have to ask this question. You know that a joint venture partner is going to come in and check it all. Therefore, you would think that nobody would be fraudulent in the results. And as a result, you therefore, as an investor, would say, if everybody's making announcements and all these people are interested in this, and you'll see in a moment what happens to the stock market as a result of these early findings of positive gold, the whole thing explodes. So that by the time you get 1 year later from the giving over the preliminary survey permit, by 1996, the Bre-X is now listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange and the Montreal Stock Exchange. Now, these are big players, particularly Toronto. Not to say Montreal isn't, but Toronto's known for one of the major stock exchanges for mining in the world. And the opening price isn't for pennies because of the gold announcements. Its opening price is $187 per share. So if Mr. Walsh owned his shares, well, he created them, and let's assume that you bought early for 5 cents a share, you can just determine if it's now 187, you've made a spectacular fortune, no matter which way you look at it.
Yeah, and a lot of people were buying into this because I guess just as you said, they thought, well, they're going to have to prove it, but really the controllers of the information were just a few people.
Well, that's true, and it becomes more complex after this gets listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange and the Montreal Stock Exchange. So we're now in 1996, gets listed at $187 per share, and everybody's now looking at it. Everybody says, wow, you can go out to market and take this company out for that price. It's spectacular. Between 1996 and the end of, in 1 year, all the way to February of 97, they make 4 announcements. That company does. And the gold has gone from 39 million ounces in June of 96 to 46.9 million ounces in July to 57 million ounces in December. And by February, it's all the way up to almost twice where they started these press releases to 70.9 million ounces of gold, making it the largest single gold deposit in the history of mankind. So you get all the way to February, and these announcements have come rolling out of Bre-X. Watching of this, of course, are all the big security companies, particularly ones in Canada who have an interest in this. And one of those was my client, Nesbitt Burns. And they were following this stock, and they were making their own analysis of it. And they were making a lot of money in the buying and selling of these stocks as they were running a marketplace. So it was a hugely involved, and then lots of other companies were following the stock and helping people buy and sell. We're talking about $8 billion worth of activity in a very short period of time. And then all of a sudden you've got speed. Now, how they find 39 from June to 70 million ounces in February, 7 months later, that's a lot of drilling. That's a lot of estimates, and away they went. Now, the professionals, the high-level professionals, this whole area is filled with a lot of skeptics, as you might imagine, old grizzled characters, if I only look at the men's side of it. They're going, yeah, we don't believe it. Oh, we do believe it. Oh, maybe. And there's a magic piece here, which I always was amazed at, and that is the willing suspension of disbelief. You want to believe it, even though you think it's not real. You just want to believe it.
It's so tempting.
Oh, are you kidding?
Yeah.
And there are a couple of tricks here. Number one, if you go in early, you can go out again. And if it continues to go up, you can use your profits and put them back in and come out again. And if you were a doubting person, you were making money as the stock market went up. That's number one. Then you have the negative side of all this is that the people who were doing the fraud knew it was only a matter of time until the gig was up, because they're going to go and try and find it and it ain't going to be there. So we march, and towards the end of 97, or sort of the end of 96 and the beginning of 97, we're only talking about really a highly intense period of about 8 months from, a little more than 8 months, but a very short period of time. And they decided the Indonesian government decided to encourage Freeport-McMoRan to be the joint venture partner. And they begin their, in February, they begin their review of drilling by doing what are called twin holes. They go to the old hole and they drill it and see what's there. And Freeport doesn't find any gold. So we now come to a period of difficulty for Bre-X and the company, because I assume the Freeport no gold was rumored but not put out there by press release, because no one really knows. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. You got to be careful what you say now, although they should have been careful earlier. So every single spring, there is a meeting in Toronto of the prospectors of the world who come to talk about their projects around the world. And this particular meeting is infamous and the most important one in the world. And it was held in March of 1997. And Mr. de Guzman, the exploration manager for Bre-X Minerals, was there, and he was celebrated as the most important guy in the world.
He get an award that year?
Not only did he get an award, he was carried in on a silver tray on top of the tray, carried into the dinner. Everybody's great applause. So there he was.
He literally didn't know he was going to be dinner the next day.
Well, there's a point there. There's a mystery there. So the first point is that he does fall out. He returns to Busan, knowing that by this point, Freeport-McMoRan is saying, where the hell is this damn gold? And presumably they paid a lot of money to get to be the joint venture partner, and they're going to win, they're going to lose. Well, we're going to see. And they also then, when they found their Freeport, they went and got another mining company, an expert called Strathcona Mineral Services Limited, who was retained to go and check out where maybe McMoRan was making a mistake. So all of a sudden, all these results are now under review between March and May. De Guzman returns, presumably to face questions at Busan in Indonesia, and he is out of a helicopter. Now, I use my words very carefully. He is allegedly out of a helicopter. Now, I rode in that helicopter to the site a year later. And it was eerie because, of course, you're flying over this jungle, which is filled with wild pigs and all kinds of animals. And if you happen to find yourself floating out of a helicopter and dead, then the pigs are going to eat you, or everything else is going to eat you. And so you might not even be recognized, if at all. So, and of course, you're in this vast region of rainforest, hot, couldn't possibly get there unless you came in through the air. And so going on the helicopter with this It was a big military helicopter owned by the military in Indonesia, and I guess rented. But the question is, was that de Guzman? Did he die? It certainly ended, for all intents and purposes, except for Felderhoff, it ended the ability to get behind to what happened. Because the Filipino geologists were over in their little corner cooking themselves in some little hut. And the Indonesian ones, the Filipino ones, they were led by de Guzman, and he was the one who, if there were secrets, had them. And he just after coming in one day on a silver tray as the hero of the world, he finishes the next week. It was a bit like Icarus. He flew too close to the ground. And, once you're out of that helicopter, there's nothing much is going to save you. So we don't know whether de Guzman died or not. We have no idea. And
There are a lot of conspiracy theories, but
there are theories, and there's allegations that his wife continues to get support money, and who knows?
Who knows?
But it's got a great mystery to it, as all these murder mysteries should have, and there's no way to resolve it. So in May of 1997, Nesbitt Burns' chief analyst was speaking to a call to investors from around the world, as they do in these circumstances. And his last words were, because there's all kinds of rumors swirling around that someone was saying there was no gold because they wanted to steal the property, and they were trying to fool this and affect the market. Who knew what was really going on? And Egizio Bianchini, the chief analyst for Nesbitt Burns, he announces to the world, "I've been to the site, and I've seen the gold. It's there." That was on the night of May the 3rd. On May the 4th, Bre-X announced there was no gold. Now that was proximate. That was definitely a bad timing as for Nesbitt Burns and Egizio. And they never found the gold. The stock fell to 90 cents. The market capitalization ranging between 6 to 44 billion, depending on your number, was literally gone. And they have, first time I was introduced to a dead cat bounce. And that is when there's a collapse like this, the stock falls, and then some hopeful people thinking it might be a fraudulent announcement, they think it's going to pop up, and they do. They go and invest again. They've lost more. They say, well, the dead cat bounce, because these guys are risk takers, right? You got to love these guys. I don't know how they live their lives with the risk that they take, but if you're right, it's great. If you're wrong, well, too bad. Anyway, there's a dead cat bounce, and then it was gone.
Bre-X is worthless. They sue Walsh.
But they also sued the brokers.
Yeah.
And they sued Felderhoff and a host of others, but it was largely the obviously the financial community, with all their owned by banks and firepower. That's the source of going to be the big money for all the shareholders.